December 1981. The Uptown Theater on North Broadway. 4,381 seats, an acre of them under a ceiling 5 stories up. Its interior is said to be bigger than Radio City Music Hall in New York. It is, beyond any argument, the grandest movie palace Chicago ever built. And then, one cold week, the heat in the building goes off and a water pipe freezes. It bursts. Water pours down through the plaster, the gold leaf, the murals, and the velvet, flooding one of the most opulent theater interiors in the United States in the dark. By the time anyone deals with it, the damage is done. The Uptown closes, and it has stayed closed, sitting empty on that corner for more than 40 years. The grandest theater Chicago ever built, finished off by a burst pipe. To understand how Chicago built a palace like that, and how it let it rot, you have to start in a grocery store. On the near west side, around the turn of the century, a pair of Bessarabian Jewish immigrants named Israel and Augusta Balaban ran a failing grocery and raised 8 kids. Augusta, everybody called her Gussie, gave her sons a piece of advice that turned out to be worth a fortune. Stop selling groceries, she told them. Sell movies instead. Her logic, as the family told it for decades after, was this: people squeeze your cantaloupes and never buy them, but a customer who pays a nickel for a movie cannot ask for the nickel back if he does not like it. The 2 oldest boys listened. Barney Balaban was working at a cold storage plant for $25 a week. His brother A.J. was singing for tips at a Nickelodeon called the Kedzie. In 1908, they got into the theater business, and by 1916, they had teamed up with a local operator named Sam Katz. Balaban and Katz was born. Their first real theater changed American moviegoing forever. The Central Park Theater opened on Roosevelt Road in North Lawndale in 1917, and Barney, remembering those years hauling beef at the cold storage plant, did something nobody had done before. He took the refrigeration technology Chicago had perfected for chilling carcasses in the stockyards, hired the ice machine company that built it, and used it to cool a movie theater. The Central Park became the first air-conditioned movie house in America. On a 100-degree July afternoon, for the price of a ticket, you could sit in cool, dry air. Doctors started prescribing it for heat exhaustion. People came for the temperature and stayed for the picture. That was the whole idea. Balaban and Katz weren't selling movies. They were selling escape, a few hours where a factory worker could feel like royalty. So they hired 2 brothers, the architects Cornelius and George Rapp, and told them to build cathedrals. The Chicago Theater opened on State Street in 1921, $4 million of French Baroque, with a grand lobby modeled on the Royal Chapel at Versailles and a staircase copied from the Paris Opera House. Then the Tivoli on the south side. Then in 1925, the Uptown, the acre of seats. George Rapp explained the philosophy without a trace of embarrassment. These palaces, he said, were not showing off. They were a shrine to democracy, a place where the wealthy rubbed elbows with the poor and were the better for the contact. Picture walking into one of them on a Saturday in 1928. You've paid a quarter. A doorman in a military-cut uniform pulls open a bronze door taller than you are. Balaban and Katz dressed their ushers like field marshals and drilled them like soldiers. You step out of the Chicago heat into cool, conditioned air, maybe the first you've ever felt. The lobby is 5 stories tall. There is a nursery to leave the kids, a smoking lounge, an art gallery. Upstairs, before the movie even starts, there is a full orchestra and a vaudeville act. And then a Wurlitzer organ the size of a house rises straight up out of the floor. For 1 quarter, you, a meat packer, a seamstress, a kid from the block, are treated like visiting royalty. That was the product. Not the film, the feeling. By the late 20s, Balaban and Katz ran more than 100 theaters. Paramount Pictures bought a controlling interest in 1926. And in 1936, Barney Balaban, the grocer's son who cooled a theater with slaughterhouse technology, was named president of Paramount Pictures. He ran the studio for the next 28 years. The most beautiful of all the palaces was the one that died first. The Paradise Theater opened in West Garfield Park in 1928. It wasn't a wrap building. It was designed by John Eberson, the master of the atmospheric theater, and it was meant to be the most beautiful room in the city. An indoor French garden beneath a domed ceiling, painted to look like a deep blue evening sky, scattered with stars. It had a 5-manual Wurlitzer, one of only 3 the company ever built, and it had a flaw built right into its masterpiece. That gorgeous dome got blamed for the theater's acoustics. When Talking Pictures arrived a year after the Paradise opened, dialogue suddenly mattered, and the room couldn't handle it. Audiences drifted a few blocks over to the Marlboro where they could actually hear the picture, and the Paradise never recovered. Balaban and Katz closed it in 1956 and hired a contractor to tear it down on a 6-month schedule. But Eberson had built the Paradise to outlast the pyramids, and the building refused to go. The demolition dragged on for nearly 2 years. The most beautiful theater in Chicago fought the wrecking ball to a near standstill before it finally came down. The land became a supermarket. Today, it's an auto repair shop. Its only real monument is a Styx album. The band named their 1981 #1 record Paradise Theater, using this exact building's rise and fall as a metaphor for the country. The Paradise died first, but the ground was already washing out from under all of them. 3 things killed the Chicago movie palace. The first was television. By the early 1950s, the thing Balaban and Katz had spent 40 years selling, A Reason to Leave the House, was sitting in the living room for free. The second was the law. In 1948, the Supreme Court ruled in United States versus Paramount Pictures that a studio owning the theaters that showed its own films was an illegal monopoly. The studios were forced to sell off their theater chains. The machine that built the palaces, where the studio made the film, owned the house and guaranteed the seats were full, was broken up by federal order. One economic study of the decree estimated it was responsible for 30 to 40% of the drop in movie theaters per capita in the parts of the country it hit hardest. The third was the city changing underneath them. The grand neighborhood palaces had been built for dense, walkable wards full of people who went to the movies every single week. As those neighborhoods emptied toward the suburbs through the 50s and 60s, the crowds it took to fill 4,000 seats simply were not there anymore. And when the suburbs did go out to a movie, they drove to a multiplex off the expressway, 6 small screens, cheap to run, with no acre of seats to heat. So they fell, one after another. The Central Park, the air conditioning pioneer, closed as a movie house around 1970 and became a Pentecostal church, which it still is today. The Marlboro, the Granada, the Southtown, and the Tivoli were torn down and turned into parking lots and vacant land. The Riviera, a block from the Uptown, hung on only by becoming a rock club. And the Uptown itself rose and flooded in 1981 and went dark. By 1985, even the flagship was on the chopping block. The Chicago Theater, the Wonder Theater of the World, the Versailles Lobby, and the State Street Marquee that is on every Chicago postcard closed its doors and was scheduled for demolition. And here, finally, the story breaks the other way. A group called Chicago Theater Restoration Associates, working with the city, bought the building in 1985 for the specific purpose of stopping the wrecking ball. They spent millions and 9 months restoring it. And on September 10, 1986, the Chicago Theater reopened with a gala concert by Frank Sinatra. That marquee, spelling Chicago in 6-foot letters, is still lit tonight. It survived because enough people decided, at the last possible minute, that some buildings are worth more than the dirt they sit on. The Uptown never got that minute. It is still standing on North Broadway, landmarked, privately owned, and empty. Jerry Mickelson bought it out of a foreclosure auction in 2008. The city announced a $75 million restoration in 2018, and the plan fell apart by 2021. The latest estimate to bring it back is around $190 million. The water stains from that one cold week in 1981 are still up there in the plaster, 4 stories over an acre of empty seats. George Rapp called these places shrines to democracy, where the wealthy rubbed elbows with the poor. Chicago built the grandest ones in America so that a kid with a quarter could spend an afternoon feeling like a king. The acre of seats is still there, in the dark, waiting for somebody to turn the heat back on.